So, hello there. Well, how do you do? Nice to see you. Nice to see you. I thought we were going to do a dance act up here. I think you're going to introduce her to Gene Kelly. My own tears. You are the sunshine of my life. She's a little young for me, I got news for you. Too young. You are the apple of my eye. Forever you'll be in my heart. You must have known that I was lonely, 'cause she came to my rescue. And I know this got to be heaven. How much love can possibly be inside you? You are the sunshine of my life. That's why I'll always be around. You are the apple of my eye. Forever you'll be in my heart. Yeah, you are the sunshine of my life, of my life. Light my fire, light my fire, light my fire. You are the sunshine. Okay.
Why don't you come on
to my twist party? Come on, where the bright moon shines. Come on, we'll dance the night away. I'm gonna make you mine, Sherry baby. Sherry, can you come out tonight?
Why don't you come on?
Put your red dress on. You look so fine. Move it nice and easy. Girl, you make me lose my mind. Sherry baby. Sherry baby. Sherry, can you come out tonight? Come out tonight. Come out tonight. Come out tonight. Come out tonight.
Every time it rains, pennies from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven? You'll find your fortunes falling all over the town. Be sure that your umbrella umbrella is upside down. Trade them for a package of sunshine and flowers. If you want the things you love, you must have showers. So when you hear it thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you and me. Package of sunshine and flowers. If you want the things you love, you must have showers. So when you hear it thunder, don't run under a tree. There'll be pennies from heaven for you and her day was born in shades of blue. Her song was sad, the words were true. Her morning came too fast, too soon, and died before the afternoon. Poor Lady Day could use some love, some sunshine. Lady Day has too much rain. Poor Lady Day could use some spring, some breezes. Lady Day has too much pain. It's such a lonely face, it's such a cloudy sky, so many shadows in her eye, so many empty dreams, so many bitter times. Just a handful of broken rhymes. Poor Lady Day could use a smile, some kindness. Lady Day has too much rain. Poor Lady Day could use some dreams, some flowers. Lady Day has too much pain. Just too much to say, just too much to know. Too little time
hunger. May you never take one single breath for granted. God forbid love ever leave you empty-handed. I hope you still feel small when you stand beside the ocean. Whenever one door closes, I hope one more opens. Promise me that you'll give faith a fighting chance. And when you get the choice to sit it out or dance, I hope you dance. I hope you dance. I hope you never fear those mountains in the distance. Never settle for the path of least resistance. Living might mean taking chances, but they're worth taking. Loving might be a mistake, but it's worth making. Don't let some helping heart leave you bitter. When you come close to selling out, reconsider. Give the heavens above more than just a passing glance. And when you get the choice to sit it out or dance, I hope you dance.
Is a wheel in constant motion.
I hope you dance.
So long.
I hope
Tell
you
me who
dance.
wants to look back on their youth and
I
wonder
hope you
where those years have gone.
I hope you still feel small when you stand beside the ocean. Whenever one door closes, I hope one more opens. Promise me that you'll give faith a fighting chance. And when you get the choice to sit it out or dance, dance. I hope.
I can only imagine what it will be like when I walk by your side. I can only imagine what my eyes will see when your face is before me. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? can only imagine.
Of Pueblo. 7 grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren, and by her brother Lou Ferraro and wife Carmela. Breast cancer may have taken Marge's life, but it didn't beat Marge. She was first diagnosed in 2001, a second diagnosis in 2005, and a third terminal diagnosis in 2017. Marge was a fighter. She was tough, she was strong, and she endured countless struggles from both the disease and the treatments. She overcame many personal and health challenges through life, never complaining and never wanting to be a burden on those around her. Following graduation from high school, Marge worked for Bright Cleaners in Eatontown, New Jersey. And while working there in 1961, she met an Army soldier stationed at Fort Monmouth, Larry May. They married in 1962. They spent the beginning of their marriage stationed in Germany, and that gave Marge the opportunity to visit Italy. She was able to spend time with her relatives, to explore where her parents grew up at, and immerse herself fully in this Italian heritage that she valued so much. After Germany, they moved to Trinidad, Colorado, and in 1966 moved to Lamar. While her children was young, Marge was a full-time homemaker, but as the kids got older, Marge worked for Elmer Park's bookkeeping. She worked for the RE2 school district, and then settled in the banking businesses for Lamar Industrial Bank starting in 1976, and then on to the First National Bank until she retired in 2001. And even at that point, she continued working part-time for First National Bank until she fully retired in 2017 at the age of 81. And it might sound cliche for me to say this, but Marge was a true Jersey girl. A sassy Italian Catholic school, take no guff, always looking polished girl. What you might imagine or what you might have seen or heard about Italian girls growing up in that part of the United States in those times was exactly what Marge was. We saw the pictures, and it gives you an idea of what Marge was. And I mean this as a compliment, and I told it to Steve earlier. Marge was a stereotype for that Jersey girl through and through, and I don't mean that in a bad way. She never left that behind, and I think that's pretty impressive for where Marge ended up in her life, that she never, ever let that slip away. Even though she was brought all the way out here, which is a world away from Red Bank, New Jersey in so many ways, and even though she loved where she was from and her life there and the family there, she never showed any regrets about the changes in her life. She loved Lamar. She loved the family here, her friends here, and through everything that she faced, she loved the life that she found here. And at a point in her life when Marge could have left here and gone back home, she stayed in Lamar because that was now her home. But we know mostly all those things about Marge, don't we? To know more about Marge, though, to see the Marge that we saw in some of these pictures, we need to understand her childhood. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. And then a point, Ty is going to come up and talk, and then I'll close with some other thoughts later on. But it will help us to know Marge in a better way if we can understand her childhood and where and how she grew up, and see how those things shaped the woman that we all came to know. I knew Marge the woman, but honestly, I would have loved to know Marge the girl. And seeing some of those pictures, I think she would have been a hoot to be around. So let's begin the story with Marge's dad, Gaetano. Gaetano immigrated to the United States when he was 14 years old, on his own. That's a pretty young guy to do something like that. But the reason that he did this helps us to understand some about Marge. So in the village they lived in, there was a guy that, again, not to be cliche or stereotype, but in the true Italian sense of the word, was the boss. And one day in this village there was a gathering, and the boss wanted to be sitting in this certain chair, but Gaetano was already sitting in this chair. The boss had him tossed out. Gaetano went and got a knife and attacked the boss. And as things settled down, the boss, and I'm quoting Marge's brother Lou here, the boss put a hit out on Gaetano. So his family got him out of town, moved him to a few villages, got enough money, put him on a ship, and he went to the United States. That's how Marge's family got here. And that same toughness and resolve is what we know of as Marge and what got her through so many things in her life. And we knew that. We saw those things, but now we get a glimpse of where some of that came from. Marge and all of her brothers and sisters grew up in a working class home centered around family. They loved their life, they loved their family. So as we were talking with Lou on the phone, he told us some things that I didn't know. So I want to share those to help us understand more about Marge that we probably didn't know. He said they usually called her Margie to aggravate her, sometimes maybe Maggie. And he talked about how much their sister Mary loved Marge. And he saw in some of the pictures, as a little girl, Marge was dressed up, had the shoes, the purse, and the hat. And he said Mary worked extra so that she could have enough money to buy those nice clothes and those things for Marge, because she wanted to have Marge fixed up and taken care of as her little sister. And he told us how every night when they would get their homework done, him and Margie would be given 15 cents by their sister Mary. They would go next door to the store beside their house, buy a bag of potato chips, come back home, lay on the living room floor, and listen to their radio programs. Mary did that constantly for him. She loved her brothers and sister. He talked about how Marge reflected those same thoughts and those same feelings of love back to her family. When him and his brothers would go out at night and come back home, didn't matter really how late it was, if Marge heard them come in, she would get up, go downstairs, and fix a meal for them, a whole meal, pork chops, all the trimmings, whatever. They had supper when they went out. When they got back, Marge fixes a whole nother meal because she wanted to do that for them. Marge wanted to take care of all of these guys. Lou talked about how much their dad loved Marge and how much she loved him, and how when their dad would come home from work, he would always go sit at the kitchen table, big kitchen table, with a glass of wine and the newspaper. And when he would do that, Margie would always come up to him and start loving on him. But then Lou also said this: their dad had about 3 hairs on his head. And so as Margie is loving on him and patting his shoulders and stuff, she would always start twirling her fingers in his hairs and get them to where they're standing straight up, wrapped around her finger. And he'd tell her he didn't want her to do that, so she would say she wouldn't, but yeah, she was every single night. And after hearing that, I think, it wasn't just his hair that Marge had wrapped around her finger, I think. But Lou also told us about another nickname they called Margie, Twinkle Toes. She was always bumping into things, he said. They had this big round table in their kitchen, and their dad always joked that this table was square to begin with, but Twinkle Toes bumped into the corner so many times it just got rounded into a circle. I mean, seriously, Twinkle Toes. Do you get the love coming from that one? So he talked about how they went to the beach a lot as kids, and Marge loved the beach, but not the water. Marge didn't swim, and so Diana asked him on the phone, Mom didn't swim, and she definitely didn't want to get her hair wet, so what did you guys do at the beach? And Lou told her that after a certain age, he would go be with his friends and Margie would go and do her thing. And Diana says, but she didn't swim, so what did she do? And Lou says, well, Margie went to the beach to let the boys look at her. She loved the beach, and she loved to go crabbing. And that's a hard thing for me to imagine, growing up here, to just be able to go down to the beach and hunt up some crabs and bring them home for supper. But that was one of Marge's favorite things to do. And Lou talked about one time when her and her girlfriends were busting the boys' chops about how they could get more crab than the boys. And so they had a contest this one day. And Lou said him and the boys, they were just kind of messing around, not really doing it hard. He said the girls were doing pretty good. They caught a lot of crab that day. And all of a sudden, their bushel is full, and Twinkle Toes, she's coming over there to show us, and she's trying to walk across the stream, and naturally, Twinkle Toes trips over something and dumps all the crabs out, and they're gone. So the boys won just by having a few like that. That's Marge's life before we knew her. And I think that helps us, or it helps me anyway, get to know a little bit better why Marge was who she was. And so at this point, I'm going to pre-introduce Marge's grandson, Tyrell Woodworth. He's going to have some thoughts in a little while, but first we're going to listen to another one of Marge's favorite songs from when she was growing up, see some more slides, and at that point, Ty will come up and share his thoughts about his grandmother.
I hope the days come easy and the moments pass slow, and each road leads you where you wanna go. And if you're faced with a choice and you have to choose, I hope you choose the one that means the most to you. And if one door opens to another door closed, I hope you keep on walking till you find the window. If it's cold outside, show the world the warmth of your smile. But more than anything, more than anything, my wish for you is that this life becomes all that you want it to. Your dreams stay big, your worries stay small. You never need to carry more than you can hold. And while you're out there getting where you're getting to, I hope you know somebody loves you and wants the same things too. Yeah, this is my wish. I hope you never look back, but you never forget all the ones who love you in the place you left. I hope you always forgive and you never regret, and you help somebody every chance you get. Oh, you find God's grace in every mistake, and always give more than you take. But more than anything, yeah, more than anything, my wish for you is that this life becomes all that you want it to. Your dreams stay
everyone. Thank you for coming out today to Nanny Service. As many of you may know me as Ty, I'll also be going as Alex today. For those of you that knew Nanny well, you would know that she was never very good with names. She'd often confuse our names at family gatherings, and so I think we've all just kind of learned to go by our second or third names just for ease of conversation and to keep Nanny happy. When I was asked to speak today, my first question was, what would you like me to speak about? And the answer to that was to speak about Nanny and what she means to you. Well, that's both easy and hard to do, because Nanny means the world to me, and she means the world to the rest of her grandkids. However, it is difficult to put into words the impact that she has had on our lives. And as they grow older, Nanny will also mean the world to her great-grandkids. And I say that because you will hear in my speech, although Nanny has left us physically, her traditions, her teachings, and her ways will continue to be passed on for generations to come. She has created a legacy through the family that she loves so much. Nanny always had a soft spot for babies in her family. Our parents quickly learned, after having children of their own, that Nanny had a new generation of favorites. And now we grandchildren have quickly learned that great-grandchildren have Nanny in their corner. This was fully demonstrated by Nanny's smiles at our last gathering over Christmas. Let's just say that Nanny wasn't too enthused about being out in the cold taking pictures in pajamas. However, whenever she took pictures with her newest additions to the family, the new great-grandbabies, she was all smiles. Nanny could often be heard telling a parent not to make the baby cry. As a parent, that's a really challenging position to be in. You know, that baby may really need to have that rock taken out of its mouth that it just put in. However, you really don't want to upset Nanny either. As a kid, a special part of growing up was having sleepovers with Nanny. And if you all will open your programs, you'll see on the inside cover a song titled Que Sera. Some of you may notice or may recall that Doris Day had sung this song previously, but we all remember it as Nanny sang it. Nanny would substitute the lyrics to personalize it for whichever grandkid she was singing to. And she would sing this song to each of us every night as we were falling asleep. During the summer, the frequency of sleepovers would increase. Nanny was never a really big fan of thunderstorms. I recall multiple nights huddled with her in a bathtub, waiting for tornado sirens to silence. I remember these special nights, often thinking that I was there to comfort Nanny and to make her feel better. But in the end, it was Nanny who was providing the comfort. She would always explain that the thunder was the sound of angels bowling in the clouds. Typically, Nanny would spoil us on these overnight stays. Spoil us in ways that our parents would not have approved of. Or as I was reminded by Jen and Taryn and Tyann and Rihanna, Nanny would say she just loved us. It was not spoiling. And then, when bedtime came, each night she would sing my favorite song as we fell asleep. Many times, we grandkids would awake to breakfast in bed, just one last special note that Nanny would provide. So, as Bon had mentioned a little bit previously, also, mischief was always a fun conversation in Nanny's life. Nanny had a knack for mischief, and I think it is safe to say that it is a trait she has passed on to her kids and her grandkids alike. She enjoyed telling jokes and pulling pranks. Nanny had a lighthearted sense of humor, which brought joy to her family and friends around her, and increased blood pressure as well. She was at times what you might call ornery. Actually, she admitted to that 2 days after Christmas this year. This was still evident the day before she passed. When Uncle Al offered her some soup, she let him know in no uncertain terms that she was not interested. However, when she was offered a piece of Jen's cheesecake, she darn near jumped out of her chair. The presence of cheesecake was noticed by her great-granddaughter, Ember, who made her way over to Nanny's side and asked, as babies do, for a bite. Well, Nanny gave her a bite, all right. She gave her a bite of the fork. We were all laughing as Nanny would lightly dip the fork into the cheesecake and then trick Ember into thinking that she was getting a fair shake. Not long before Nanny passed, I walked back to her bedroom to check in on her and found a gathering of family and friends telling stories of Nanny's mischief. This was actually quite fun and really therapeutic for the family. Some of the most memorable of these occasions included her jailhouse prank, the double backflip, and her kung fu drunken dialing. That's a good story we'll get to in a minute. For many of you who knew Nanny, you may have heard of her infamous backflip prank, double backflip, excuse me. Nanny perfected this feat and was known to pull it off at home and at work alike. She would start off by clearing the room, moving chairs and hazards out of the way. Then she would stretch, ensuring that she was limber enough not to injure herself. Finally, after swinging her arms back and forth, she would thrust her arms backwards with both middle fingers raised to the sky. It was quite a sight to see. Another of her Hall of Fame pranks that Nanny pulled involved an inmate, a pen pal, and Uncle John. She never did provide a full explanation, but it all started one day when Uncle John received a letter from a female inmate at a prison. I believe it's somewhere in the Midwest, so I could be mistaken in that. This letter, which Uncle John received without any explanation, contained, the second letter that Uncle John received from the inmate contained a photograph and a request for money. The third and final of these mysterious letters was filled with frustration, in which the inmate asked for her photograph back. If Uncle John was not going to send the money, then she would like to have her photograph back. Well, it turns out Nanny was behind this the whole time. She had somehow found this individual and been sending letters to the individual in prison on Uncle John's behalf, carrying on the pen pal relationship for him. I must say that's one for the record books. I've pulled some pranks in my life, but never anything on that scale. On another note, one summer when I was home from college, Michael and I decided to stay the night with Nanny. It had been a while since we had enjoyed an evening Miller Lite beverage, so we decided that we may as well pick up a six-pack and have a beer with Nanny. At one point, Michael mentioned that Nanny should feel safe because he knew Kung Fu. Nanny lost it. This was apparently one of the funniest things she had ever heard. When she was able to compose herself again, she immediately asked for her cell phone. Nanny was going to drunk dial, and we were going to see it and be there to tell about it. She called up my mom and awoke her from her sleep, and then exclaimed with no explanation that Michael knew Kung Fu. It goes without saying, that night did not end with que sera. So, as we've also heard a little bit from Bon, you can take the girl out of Jersey, but you can't take Jersey out of the girl. And this is something that was a piece of information was given to me by Aunt Di a few days ago when she texted me at 3 o'clock in the morning to ask if I was awake. The answer was no. But this was something that Nanny really wanted to convey and wanted to be, people to think about when remembering her. While talking about Nanny in Jersey, it dawned on me, why did Nanny never move back to New Jersey? The answer was simple. It was her family. It was her kids, her grandkids, and eventually her great-grandkids. And Nanny was right. You couldn't take the Jersey out of Nanny. Many of our family traditions were molded by Nanny's upbringing in New Jersey and her Italian heritage. One of the best memories each of us has with Nanny growing up are the trips that we took with her to New Jersey. We went on family trips with our parents, but Nanny would also take us individually with her back and to show us where she grew up. We all loved getting to spend time with our family in New Jersey, marveling at their funny accents. We enjoyed the great food, going crabbing and digging for clams, trips to Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty, and of course, the beach. Oh, and I can't forget to mention the trips to Lighthouse for Italian ice. These were special occasions, of course, and I have to think Nanny was intentionally trying to instill a bit of Jersey into each of us. I don't think we realized it at the time, but one of the greatest parts of the trips was to be there with Nanny and see her interacting with her siblings. The bonds they shared were evident, and Nanny was really in her element when in their company. As you may have picked up by now, Nanny created many memories with family through cooking. She always made sure everyone else's plate was made and place was set at the table before she would serve herself, and was the first person to stand and clear the table after a meal, ensuring that everyone else was able to spend time in one another's presence around the dinner table. Food was central, and family meals were religion, creating and sharing her own language for food by describing quantities in uncertain terms such as pinches and hints. We will all spend the rest of our lives trying to replicate Nanny's recipes and arguing over the pronunciation of traditional Italian ingredients and the way that Nanny would say them, such as mozzarella and gabagool. Food was life for Nanny, and although her recipes may have contained ingredients whose names Nanny created herself, she was always passionate about sharing them with family. Each Christmas, the most popular item was her homemade crab sauce and pasta. Making the pasta was a favorite memory shared by many. Tyann recalls last year when Nanny thought she would break the tradition and use an electric pasta machine. She quickly reminded Nanny that she had been taught to do things the right way with the traditional hand crank machine, and that would be just fine. Nanny also always had treats hidden around the house. These were not the usual treats, but instead special traditional foods from her Italian upbringing, and possibly an occasional frozen Totino's pizza in the freezer. When visiting, we would often search for the treats, and in the event that she had one for us, it was special to each of us. It was special because Nanny had thought to make food for you and you alone. We would have a fun in teasing each other that we were more special than the other. Uncle Al in particular seemed to garner lots of treats, including pork roll, manicotti, and pickled eggplant. Rihanna recalls one of her favorites, watermelon. Nanny was always sure to have a fresh watermelon available when Ree would come to visit. Although we have been spread out across the country, Nanny never stopped thinking about us. She never forgot to send cards for birthdays and holidays. Often, sending them in time, they would arrive before the event, even by snail mail. And she was always worried about where and what we were up to. Often she would call my wife Chris multiple times a day when I would disappear into the woods for a backcountry hunting trip, or checking in on Rihanna across the country at school and work. And when any of us was on a road trip, Nanny was sure to call and check in. She was always and will always be with us anytime we face adversity and danger in our lives. I am speaking to you today from the perspective of a grandkid and telling the story of who Nanny was. But it is not lost on all of us that Nanny was special to many people in this community. Growing up in Lamar, Nanny was well known to many of our friends. In fact, I'll bet that there are some in this audience who couldn't even tell you Nanny's first name. She was simply known as Nanny to all. She always provided an inviting environment with a cold drink and some good food for everyone. In fact, I'm pretty sure my friends would share a meal or a good conversation with Nanny when I wasn't even in town. Nanny was well known in her community and had strong bonds with her friends. Many of these friends who are with us here today, and some who are with Nanny now, had such strong relationships that they too became family. We know them as aunts and uncles, and it's not uncommon for the question to be raised of how we are related. Typically, the answer is a shrug of the shoulder, and I don't know, we just are. Throughout her life, Nanny continually displayed courage in the choices and actions she took. But the ultimate was the strength and courage it took for her to battle cancer, not once, but 3 times in her life. I remember very vividly driving home from an elk hunting trip a few years ago after having just learned that cancer had returned. My eyes were full of tears and my heart was full of fear. I didn't know what to expect for Nanny, but she gave it hell. She endured many hours of pain and discomfort and wouldn't give up. She did it all for her family. As Rihanna said, Nanny was a selfless individual, and there is no more a selfless act than this. And for this, I have to say thank you to Nanny. Thank you for the time with you that you fought so hard to give to us all. These last couple weeks have been really tough, really tough. It is not lost on me that Nanny's passing has been hard on us all, but would have been so much worse if it were not for all of those who were involved in helping Nanny through these difficult past few years. Thank you to my parents and my aunts and my uncles for doing your best. Thank you to Tyann for acting not only as a loving granddaughter, but as a caregiver and providing comfort and support to the rest of the family. Thank you to the doctors and the caregivers, and thank you to the grandkids for giving her the courage and the reason to keep on fighting. No offense, but funerals suck. And being here today is realizing one of my greatest fears. But Nanny has done it once again. She has brought us all together. And although I never expected to see 6 full-grown adults sleeping together in the same room after college, I did. And it was for Nanny, and it was beautiful. And since then, we have spent more time together as a family than we have in half a decade, and it's been great. And although I know at times we all get on each other's nerves, I know when we all return back to our busy lives, it won't be long before we are missing each other once again and looking forward to the next opportunity to gather. Likely this will be one of the many traditions that Nanny has created for us. So, as you can see, Nanny left a lasting impact on all of our lives, and we grandkids would just like to offer a charge to all of you here in the audience and to Nanny's family and her future family based on some of the lessons that we've learned from her over the years. So we would say be courteous. Nanny was always big on manners. Set an example for the world to follow in Nanny's footsteps. I will never be able to sit at a dinner table again without taking off my hat. You all should try it. Next time you sit down, take off your hat and think of Nanny. For God's sake, roll your spaghetti with a spoon. When you try and can't quite get the recipe right, that's okay. Often Nanny's recipes were not always the same, and yet that wasn't the point. It was tradition. But the tradition which mattered the most wasn't the food, but the people that we share the food with and the love that we share over the table. Be selfless, be kind, always cook a little extra to share, and love each other with everything you have. And finally, don't take life too seriously. Always remember to take time to play pranks and create smiles. Those are the memories that last. And laugh. Laugh until you pee your pants, just a little bit.
Tell me, what does it look like in heaven? Is it peaceful? Is it free like they say? Does the sun shine bright forever? Have your fears and your pain gone away? 'Cause here on earth it feels like everything
So I want to share some of my thoughts about Marge. Each of us know her, and I can't tell you something new or surprising about her. I can just share with you what I knew about her and hope that you find similar thoughts and think about those same things as well. So I've known Marge all my life. It was always fun when Marge and Larry would come out, and Angela and Alex, to our house when we were little kids. Before Diana came along, we were just little kids, and it was so much fun because it was a treat. It was fun when Diana was there too, but no, I'm not saying that, But Mom and Dad loved Marge. And even as a little kid, 4 or 5 years old, I could tell that she was kind of like a breath of fresh air in a way, Her laughter and her personality and her stories and her accent, I loved her accent and her laugh and her smile. It was so invigorating with Marge. So when I was in 7th grade, I went from the country school to come to school here in town. And at that point, Alex and I, we started to be together a lot. And that's when I really got to know Marge. I got to spend a lot of time at their house, and Marge always made me feel, like I was just one of her kids. Not extra special, not ignored, just one of her kids. Her family. She was always this super welcoming and loving and caring person. And even when I was a little kid, I could realize those things. And it wasn't that I overlooked Marge or took her for granted at those times, but it wasn't until I got older, about in high school, when I was really able to come to understand and value Marge for what she really was. And like Ty, Marge taught me how to eat spaghetti. The first time I ate spaghetti at her house, I do like any normal guy does, start chopping it up with your fork. And Marge almost passes out. She stops me, and I'm sure I look like a butcher back there to her, doing this, but she shows me what that spoon by my plate was for and how to use it. And I thought that was brilliant. And I went home, and the next time we had spaghetti, I showed everybody, and I thought Marge was a genius. And she did have such a good sense of humor. She was so happy, and she made you feel those same things, I was joking with Ange and Alex and Di the other night that Marge always made me feel like I was the son that she always wanted. And I used that to my advantage over the years, Like some of the nights when I would get to spend the night over at their house. Angela and Alex and I, we got to stay up later. Diana's going to bed, but Ange and Alex and I, we got to go to the TV room and watch scary movies on the TV. But about 9 o'clock every night, Alex is asleep. He cannot stay up late. And so Angela shows me how much fun it was to poke Alex. And he wouldn't really wake up, but he would kind of come to consciousness and say, "Knock it off!" and take this big swing at whatever it was. And, we'd wait a couple of minutes, poke him again, And after a few times of that, Marge would hear it, and she'd say, "Knock it off in there." And we would, for like 5 minutes maybe, But I think Marge always kind of got a kick out of that as well. She did have a wicked good sense of humor, bless her heart. Diana was talking about her birthday in 1997. Her mom and Angela came up to Colorado Springs to celebrate her birthday with her, and they went out to a restaurant that night, and Marge got up at the end of the meal to go to the bathroom, and the girls thought it'd be really funny to sneak out of the restaurant and leave Marge there. Yeah, so Marge comes back, and apparently, she had to process it for a little bit, and the girls thought it was hilarious, and Marge didn't quite. So the next morning, Diana and Ange go across town to get bagels for breakfast, and, of all things, they get back to Diana's apartment, and the door is halfway open, and they walk in, and there's a chair tipped over and a lamp laying down and stuff scattered around, and they're nervous. They start screaming, "Mom, Mom, Mom!" Angela starts crying. Diana's walking around screaming for Mom, and about that time, Marge steps out of the closet. Not so funny, was it, Yeah. That's great. But she could also receive it in the same way she dished it out. So there was this one time Alex was out there with us, and we were fertility testing bulls. And if you know what that is, then you know. And if you don't, you can ask me later, and I'll explain it. But Alex and I, after we get done, we go into Marge's that night, and he was telling her what had been going on. Kind of. let me preface this story by talking about Alex. You see, Marge always seemed to trust and believe everything her son told her, no matter what it was. And that was a definite flaw Marge had. And think about this. I mentioned it the other night, and Diana agreed. She had never noticed it, but she said, "You're exactly right." With Marge, whenever she's talked to the girls, it was always Angela, Diana. It was never daughter. But with Alex, most of the time it was son, son. It was kind of a cross between an accusation and an exclamation at the time. So anyway, we're in at Marge's that night, and he's telling this completely different version of how the fertility testing process works. I mean, listening to Alex tell it to Marge is like listening to a junior high age kid telling his idea of how it worked to one of his buddies. And as he's telling this story, Marge's eyes are getting bigger and bigger, and her mouth's getting farther and farther open. And, you know, I'm trying my best not to bust out laughing because it was pretty hilarious. And finally, Marge can't take it anymore and says, "Oh my God, son," you know? And at that point, we bust out laughing. And so then I gave Marge the real story of how things worked, and she thought that was really funny then that she got caught up in that. And that was something about Marge, you know, she never took herself too seriously. She never complained about things. She never wanted to burden you with something. Instead, she did her best to make things easier for you, or at least not harder for you. Instead, she always did her best to make you feel at ease and happy and comfortable, and she did that to her last breath, bless her heart. Marge had poise and grace and selflessness and cares in ways that were obvious. I mean, we all saw it and we all experienced, but also it was such a natural part of her that we knew it was Marge. It wasn't something that she was just doing on the spur of the moment. It was always her. It was never forced. It was never fake. It was always right there and as real as could be, despite what she might be going through at that time. And Marge did face and overcome a lot, with never complaint, with no bitterness, because she didn't want to burden you with that. And she didn't want to let those things rule her life as well. At a time in her life when most people that age would be starting to figure out how to coast to the finish line, Marge had to face rebuilding her life. And she also then, about the same time, had to face this terrible illness as well. And I think that's when we got to see the greatest parts of Marge come out. The joy that she had with her family and her children, grandchildren, with her desire to contribute and not to drag on anyone or anything, but only to make all those lives around her a little bit better with her love for life. And she would do that in so many ways that we saw. All the things that Marge found pleasure in, you know, whether it was something as big as spending time in New Jersey for an extended time to help one of her brothers or sisters for weeks, whether it was making all that food for those big family gatherings on the holidays, or something as simple as sitting at her table, eating breakfast and watching blue jays out her window, their bird feeder. You know, a lot of times we look for a sign of things. And Marge loved her bird feeder. She loved to watch her birds. And so Alex was, you know, sharing this with me, and I want to share it with you. There were always 2 blue jays in her yard, never more, 2 at a time. And the morning Marge passed away, about the time she was gone, Alex was looking out the window. And there were so many blue jays he couldn't count them. And he asked Ty to come count them. Ty counted 8 blue jays back there. Alex said it was like all of them that she ever fed came there to be there that moment to tell her thanks and goodbye. But then he also got a text from one of his cousins in New Jersey with a game cam out in a place with a couple of blue jays in the field. And they never have seen blue jays, and this is about the same time. And so because of that, you know, Alex can find a little comfort in that sign, because it's just something simple that Marge did so often that reflect back and he can take into his life and find a good moment like that. And that's what our lives are made up of, after all, you know, moments. Moments. I think for Alex, seeing all those blue jays at Marge's is one of those big moments. And when we look back at our lives, we don't see the whole big thing just unrolling, do we? What we see are moments random moments from our life collected that our mind singles out for some reason as something of significance. And those are the things we reflect on. And sadly, too often we don't realize those things when they're going on, and we can't appreciate the full measure of it until it's done, and we look back and see it in our mind and wish we could draw from that. So one day a few years ago, Marge had taken a fall, and she was in the hospital here for an extended time, recovering and doing some therapy. And so one morning I went in to see her. And when I walked by the nurse's station, they told me the physical therapist had just come and got Marge, and she would be gone for half hour or so. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll come back and catch her another time. I started walking back towards the doors, the entrance. And if you know the hospital, between the entrance and the nurse's station, there's a little kind of an open-air memory garden with a little walking path in it. It's enclosed on all four sides. And as I was walking by there, I looked out the window, and I see Marge and a guy out there. So I went to the door, and I stepped out there, and Marge turns and sees me, and her face just lit up. And it made me feel so good. So she says, "Bon, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I came to see you." And so she introduces me to the therapist and tells him, "This is my cousin, Bon." And she told him who I was. And in those few words that she told that guy, you would have thought that I was the world's best farmer, I was the world's handiest woodworker, and I was the nicest guy you ever met. Marge made me feel so good, just like always. Then she says, "Come here, Bon, I want to walk with you." And she has the therapist step aside, and so for about 30 minutes, her and I just walk around this little path, slow, and we just talked. We talked about big things, and we talked about little things, and we were just glad to be there together. And I look back at that and have that as one of those moments in my life that I collect, Except with this one. With this one, at the time it was going on, I realized it. I knew this was a big thing and something that I wanted to hold on to, something that I would look back on for a long time and treasure. And the beauty of it was I didn't have to wait until later and look back on it. I could experience that and understand it at that time and appreciate it for what it was, and I've always been thankful for that. As we walked around there, I had a sense of how big this was to have this time with Marge, and I knew that Marge was showing me how much she cared for me and how much I meant to her, and how, in a sense, she was thanking me for being that part in her life as well as we just walked and talked. I didn't have to look back on it. I was able to see it and know it and appreciate that moment I was given. And I am truly thankful for that. And to me, everything that I can think of and feel and know about Marge is put into that one moment. And it's something that I treasure. So I told her kids, I want to share a Bible passage with them today that I think fits Marge very well. It's something that makes me feel really good, and I want to share it. It comes from Luke chapter 6, and these are the words of Christ. "Do not be judged. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Given, it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." She didn't condemn, she didn't judge. She forgave without being asked. She gave every little bit of herself that she could. And she did it all with good measure, running over in how she showed those things in her life. And then I'm told that in the way Marge gave those things, they will be given to her as well. And that makes me feel good. I am thankful for that. So like we've said, you can take the girl out of Jersey, but you can't take Jersey out of the girl. Marge is going to be laid to rest in New Jersey next to her sister and parents. And so in absence of a graveside service here today, her family is going to be in the fellowship room after the services to receive any guests and family and friends that want to stay here and talk with them and share this meal. and the meal. This is something that her kids are doing to honor Marge, a homemade spaghetti dinner for everyone that will come. And we've talked about it. It wasn't just the food, and it wasn't just cooking, but it was the time to be together. And so that's why this is such a big thing for her kids, to have this time. That's how she grew up, that's how she raised them, and that's how they want to honor her. So we'll close this service with a word of prayer. The ushers will escort the family out, and then the guests afterwards, and we will share a homemade Italian feast. No ragu, no frozen meatballs, and no SpaghettiOs. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the day that you have given us here, and we thank you for the time that you have blessed us with, that we could come together and have this time of memorial for Marge, Father. We thank you for all of the ways that she was in our life and the things that she meant to us. We pray that we can always look at those things and draw on them and appreciate what she was, Father. We thank you for being with us this day, and we pray that you would bless those who are mourning the loss of Marge, and bless those who come here to comfort and be with them. As we have this time now after we dismiss here, God, of fellowship and food, we pray for your blessings on it as well, that not only will it nourish our bodies, but it will be something that will reach into our soul and fill some of this spot that we're trying to fill. We thank you for the blessings we have in our lives, God. We thank you for Jesus Christ. We ask for your forgiveness, and we ask all of this in his name. Amen.
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I?
When all the world is a hopeless jungle and the raindrops tumble all around, heaven opens a magic lake
To a place behind the sun, just a step behind the rainbow. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I? If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I? Strangers in the night, exchanging glances, wandering in the night. What were the chances we'd be sharing love before the night was through? Something in your eyes was so inviting, something in your smile was so exciting, something in my heart told me I must have you. Strangers in the night, two lonely people, we were strangers in the night, up to the moment when we said our first hello. Little did we know, love was just a glance away, a warm embracing dance away. And ever since that night, we've been together, lovers at first sight, in love forever. It turned out so right for strangers in the night. Just a glance away, a warm embracing dance away. Ever since that night, we've been together, lovers at first sight, in love forever. It turned out so right for strangers in the night.
How lucky can one guy be? I kissed her and she kissed me. Like the fella once said, ain't that a kick in the head? The room was completely black. I hugged her and she hugged back. Like the sailor said, quote, ain't that a hole in the boat? My head keeps spinning, I go to sleep and keep grinning. If this is just the beginning, my life is gonna be beautiful. I've sunshine enough to spread. It's just like the fella said. Tell me quick, ain't love a kick in the head? Like the fella once said, ain't that a kick?